She promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in this room that smelled of stale cigarettes and lost hope. The divorce papers were still in her bag. Her entire life was in 2 suitcases and a car seat. And her baby wouldn't stop crying. This was the bottom. Room 216 of the Sunset Motel. The name was a cruel joke. For Sarah, the sun had set. She was out of ideas, out of money, and almost out of strength. And then a knock. Not on her door. On the wall. A solid, firm thud that vibrated through the plaster. Her blood ran cold. Was it a complaint? Anger? The last thing she needed was a confrontation. But the knocking stopped. And then music. Faint, old-fashioned, and achingly gentle. A lullaby, played on a harmonica, seeped through the same wall the sound of her despair had just passed through. In that moment, in that awful place, a connection was made. By a man she'd never seen. A man whose heart had been shattered and sealed shut over 40 years before. On the other side of that wall, in room 217, Arthur lowered the harmonica. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the empty silence he was used to. It was a silence full of possibility. He looked at his hands, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, the same hands that had just played a song he thought he'd forgotten. A song for a child who never was. 42 years ago, Arthur's world was color. Her name was Eleanor. She had a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. When she told him she was pregnant, he bought a harmonica the very next day. He wanted to play for his child. To be the father his own never was. But fate is a cruel editor. There was a complication. One stormy night, he lost them both. Eleanor, and the daughter he'd already named Lily. The music in him died that night. He became a ghost. He drifted from job to job, place to place, always renting, never staying. The Sunset Motel was just another stop. A place to wait out the remainder of a life that felt like an epilogue without its story. He kept his grief in a tin box. Sacred, private, and paralyzing. The baby's cry from room 216 didn't anger him, pierced him. It was a sound from his ghost life, a sound from the room next door to his memory. And for the first time in decades, the instinct to respond was stronger than the instinct to retreat. Sarah didn't know any of this. All she knew was the knot of panic in her stomach had loosened, just a fraction. The music was human. In this impersonal, cheap space, someone had offered a sliver of grace. She looked at Mia, her sleeping face finally peaceful. "Someone's looking out for us, little bug," she whispered. A statement that felt equal parts hope and desperation. The morning was bright and mocking. Sarah faced the practical battlefield of being alone. The stroller, the bags, the car seat, it was a puzzle designed for 2 pairs of hands. As she wrestled with it, feeling the eyes of the world upon her failure, she saw him, the man from 217. He was older than she'd imagined, with a face like a weathered map of hard places. He set his thermos down and walked over, not with pity, but with a quiet, purposeful air. The wheels got a mind of its own. "Here, let me," he said, his voice gravelly but gentle. "It's fine. I've got it," Sarah replied, wary, pulling the stroller closer. He nodded, didn't push. Instead, he kneeled with some difficulty and examined the wheel. Just a pebble. "See," he plucked out a small stone. "They always find the weakest spot." He stood back up. An awkward silence. Sarah murmured a thanks. It was a simple act. But in Sarah's world, where every interaction since the divorce had felt like a negotiation or a judgment, its simplicity was disarming. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer unsolicited advice. He fixed a wheel. "Thank you. And thank you for last night. The music. It helped," Sarah said. Arthur looked down, almost shy. "It's an old tune. Good for quieting storms." "I'm Sarah. This is Mia." Arthur's eyes lingered on Mia with a profound softness. "Arthur. She's got a good pair of lungs on her." A faint, almost invisible smile touched his eyes. A fragile, wordless rhythm began. Arthur, the man who had spent years building walls around his silence, found himself listening for her day. The sound of her returning, The tired sigh he'd hear through the wall, Mia's coos. He started leaving little things. A single orange from his grocery bag, a newspaper with a circled job ad. Sarah, whose trust had been shattered, learned to accept these tiny offerings not as charity, but as a new, strange language of care. One evening, she knocked on his door. "I'm going to the grocery store. Do you need anything? I have the car." Arthur was surprised, touched. "That's kind. I could use some company on the walk back from the bus stop tomorrow. These bags get heavy." It was a lie. He wanted to give her a reason to ask him for help. It was over canned peaches and laundry detergent that the dam began to crack. Sarah talked about the light in Mia's eyes. Arthur, haltingly, mentioned the way Eleanor used to hum while she painted. They weren't sharing their deepest pains yet, just the colors of the people they had loved. For Arthur, saying Eleanor's name aloud to another person felt like releasing a breath held for 4 decades. For Sarah, talking to a man who listened without agenda was a bomb. Real crisis doesn't knock politely, kicks the door down. When Mia's fever spiked, Sarah's newfound resilience evaporated. The motel room became a prison of fear. The walls closed in. Her mind screamed failure. In that animal moment of panic, her fist didn't pound on the door to the hallway. It pounded on the wall to Arthur. Thump, thump, thump. Arthur heard it. Not just the sound, but the pitch of sheer terror within it. Time collapsed. The decades fell away. He wasn't an old man in a motel. He was a man being called to a purpose he'd missed a lifetime ago. He threw open his door, his heart hammering against his ribs not with age, but with a long-forgotten purpose. "Sarah, open the door. Now!" he called, his voice firm, commanding. She flung it open, Mia in her arms. "She's burning up. My car won't start, Arthur took charge, his hands surprisingly steady. "Get her wrapped up. My truck runs. Keys are in it. Let's go." In that rattling old truck, hurtling through the night, the last of the formalities burned away. He was no longer the neighbor. He was Arthur, and he was driving his family to the hospital. The ghost of his own loss rode with him. But this time, it didn't whisper despair. It whispered, "Not this time. You are here this time." Under the fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and fear, Arthur did what he'd been unable to do for 40 years. He bore witness to someone else's fear of loss, and he fought it with a story. His voice was low and steady. Eleanor, she was terrified of thunderstorms, not for herself. She'd say, "What if the baby is scared?" I'd play that harmonica, the same tune, to drown out the thunder. She said it was the most stubborn act of love she'd ever seen, trying to fight the sky with a song for a child not yet born. He looked at Sarah. "You're not failing. You're fighting the sky, and you're not alone in it tonight." The doctor returned. It was a bad ear infection, but she'd be fine with antibiotics. The relief was tidal. Sarah broke down, this time in release. On impulse, she hugged Arthur. He stiffened for a second, then slowly, so slowly, his arms came up and patted her back, his own eyes tightly closed. The hug lasted only seconds, but it crossed a chasm. For Sarah, it was the first safe harbor she'd felt in months. For Arthur, it was a staggering, physical reconnection to the world of the living. The touch of another human being, not in passing, but in shared relief. He felt the weight of Mia's small body, safe, against his shoulder, and something deep within him, something frozen and petrified, began to thaw with an almost audible crack. They drove back as the sky lightened from indigo to peach. The crisis had passed, leaving in its wake a new landscape between them. The barriers were gone. Sarah looked at Arthur's profile, etched against the dawn, and saw not just a kind old man, but a person who carried a universe of quiet sorrow. She knew, instinctively, that his swift, decisive action last night came from a place of deep personal knowing. "You saved us, Arthur," she said softly. Arthur kept his eyes on the road. "You did. You knew something was wrong. You acted." He paused. "That's the whole job right there." He didn't say of a parent. He didn't need to. In that moment, he bestowed upon her the title she felt she was failing: competent protector. It was a gift more valuable than any physical help. Convalescence weaves its own intimacy. With Mia on the mend, a domestic quiet settled over room 216, and Arthur became a part of its fabric. He'd appear with broth or toast, his movements in her space careful, respectful. He'd talk to Mia, not in baby talk, but in full, whimsical sentences, as if she were a respected confidant. Sarah watched this gruff man weave tales of the neon sparrow for her daughter, and she saw the father he was meant to be. The ghost of Lily was in the room, gentle and welcome. Pride is the final fortress for the lonely. When Arthur fell, it was more than his body that was laid low. It was his carefully maintained illusion of self-sufficiency. Sarah was at his side in an instant, her arm under his, bearing his weight without a second thought. The helper needed help. The wall knocker was now the one being supported. In Arthur's room, Sarah helped him into his chair. "Let me get you some ice," she said. Flustered and in pain, he nodded to a small cooler. As she opened it, the rusted tin box, perched on top of some frozen vegetables, tumbled to the floor. The lid popped open. The past, when sealed away, has a terrifying power. When it spills out, it can be disarming in its simplicity. The tiny pink sock landed at Sarah's feet. The faded photo of Eleanor, smiling, timeless, face up. The lock of hair, still holding its chestnut hue. Sarah froze, her breath catching. She wasn't snooping. She was witnessing. He let out a pained sound, not from his knee. He reached down, but stopped, his hand trembling. He looked defeated, exposed. "Please, don't," he said. Sarah gently knelt, but didn't touch the items. Arthur, who was she? It was the gentlest of questions, asked not with curiosity, but with reverence. And in that tone, Arthur heard permission to finally speak their names to someone who would hold them with care. His voice broke. "Eleanor, my wife, and our Lily. She never got to wear that sock." The story, the full, agonizing story of the hopeful pregnancy. The dreams, the stormy night, the double loss, tumbled out in ragged, tearless sentences. He spoke of the harmonica bought for lullabies, of the crib returned to the store, of the decades of running from the echo of a cry he never heard. Sarah didn't offer empty platitudes. She carefully gathered the items back into the tin, closed the lid, and placed it in his hands. Then she sat on the floor beside his chair. "You loved them so much it shaped your whole life. That's not a ghost, Arthur. That's a monument." She took a deep breath. "My ex-husband. He said Mia's crying was a nuisance, that he needed his sleep for work. You heard her cry through a wall and answered with a lullaby." In that moment, she reframed his entire existence. His life wasn't a tragedy of absence. It was a testament to a love so vast it left a permanent space. And she showed him the stark, breathtaking contrast between the man who should have cared and didn't, and the stranger who had no obligation and did. With secrets shared, their relationship transformed into a chosen kinship. Arthur's motel room became a command center for Sarah's rebuild. He reviewed her resume with a critical eye honed by years of various jobs. He asked her tough mock interview questions, his calm demeanor steadying her nerves. When she landed a modest but stable administrative job, the celebration was a shared bag of donuts and Mia smearing frosting. Old wounds often come dressed as family. Sarah's parents, well-meaning but steeped in disappointment over her divorce, saw only chaos. They saw the motel as failure. They saw Arthur, an elderly man in a stained sweater, as a risk, a vagrant. Their concern felt like condemnation. "Sarah, this is no environment for a baby. And you hardly know this gentleman," her mother said. Arthur, who had been silent, stood a little straighter. The quiet man filled the space. "You're right. You hardly know me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I know your daughter gets up every day and fights for that little girl with a courage that would shame most people. I know she's the best mother I've ever seen. And I know this environment is temporary, because she's got the will to build something permanent." My job is to make sure she remembers that on the days the fight gets hard. He didn't raise his voice. He stated facts. In defending Sarah, he articulated her own worth to her, in front of the people whose approval she'd always craved. It was a knight's vow from an old man in a parking lot. Sarah's father, for the first time, looked at Arthur, really looked, and saw not a stranger, but a protector. After her parents left, conflicted but quieter, Sarah had a realization. Her new job meant she could afford a small, modest apartment. The thought of leaving Arthur behind in the motel felt like a physical amputation. As she packed her meager belongings, the thought of driving away from the Sunset Motel, from room 217, filled her not with joy, but with a profound sense of wrongness. He had pulled her from the abyss. How could she leave him in his own, just because his was more familiar to him? One evening, over canned spaghetti, she presented it not as an offer, but as a plan. The apartment has 2 bedrooms. The second one is tiny, more of a glorified closet. It gets the morning sun, though. Arthur stopped eating, wary. That's good. For you and Mia. It's for you, Arthur. I want you to come with us. That room is yours. For as long as you want it. No rent. Just be our family. Arthur stared at her, his fork suspended. The offer was so vast, so terrifying in its promise of belonging, that he couldn't speak. To leave his grief sanctuary, his defined loneliness, for the messy, beautiful chaos of a family? It was the most frightening thing he'd been asked since the night he drove to the hospital. He tried to refuse. I'm an old man. I'm set in my ways. I'll be a burden. Sarah countered each point not with emotion, but with practicalities. Mia needs a grandpa. I need someone I trust to be there when I work late. You can help with groceries, tell your sparrow stories, and play that harmonica whenever you want. The burden is mine if I have to drive over here every day to check on you. She framed it as a mutual need. Partnership. She wasn't rescuing him. She was recruiting him, and in that, he found his dignity. He looked around his sterile motel room, at the tin box on the nightstand, and then at Sarah and Mia's hopeful faces. He gave one slow, tremulous nod. A single tear escaped, tracing the deep groove of his cheek. It was the first tear he had allowed himself to shed for Eleanor and Lily that wasn't born of pure despair, but of a love that had, against all odds, found a new form. They left at sunrise. As Arthur closed the door to room 217 for the last time, he didn't look back. He was not leaving his past behind. He was finally bringing it with him, into a future where it could be more than a relic. It could be a story told to a little girl on his knee. The motel faded from view, and with it, the chapter of his life defined solely by waiting. His new room was indeed small, but the morning sun poured in, painting everything gold. It was not a room for hiding. It was a room for being. Eleanor's photo smiled toward the new family photo. It didn't feel like a replacement. It felt like an expansion, like a tree that had long been dormant suddenly putting out a new, green shoot next to its old, strong trunk. The lullaby that once seeped through a wall of grief and desperation now filled the warm air of a home. It was a song that had traveled through 40 years of silence to find its intended audience. Mia's eyes grew heavy. Arthur's playing softened. Sarah's heart felt too big for her chest. He had waited a lifetime to give this love. She had waited for a lifeline in a stormy sea. They found each other in the neutral, lonely territory of a cheap motel, and together, they built a country of their own. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was messy, and healing, and quiet, and profound. It was the story of how a man who thought his life was over became the grandfather a little girl needed, and how a woman who thought she was broken discovered she was the architect of a new family. The knock on the wall was answered. The circle was closed. The music played on.